want to show you a simple way to make this fondant wooden cake drum. To start, I do have Tyler's powder mixed into my fondant. I only use marshmallow fondant. You sprinkle some in there, knead it in the fondant, roll it out, and it's just going to be so much easier to work with. So I'm rolling out my fondant. It's about 1/8 of an inch thick, and I'm making sure that a 16-inch cake drum will fit on it, and it will. And then I found a cake pan that is the same size of this iced cake. And what I'm doing, I'm putting the cake drum on that fondant, and my cake is offset to the back of the cake drum. So I just want to make sure that I'm putting this in the correct position. And I remove that cake drum, and now I'm just going to press this down on the fondant to give myself a little impression. And I'm taking my small cutting wheel and I'm just cutting out this circle, and then I can save that piece of fondant. And I'm cutting a line in the back so I can open it up and put it around the cake. I have some piping gel, and I'm getting piping gel all along the cake drum. And then what I like to do is thin it out with a little bit of water. This will make it easier to slide the fondant into the correct position. And this is the trickiest part of the whole thing, lifting up the fondant and putting it down on the cake drum. So I'm making sure that that inner part is touching the cake and it's completely covering the cake drum, making sure that no air bubbles are forming behind it. So I'm just pressing it down with my hand. And then where it overlaps in the back, I'm just taking my X-Acto knife, cutting through both pieces of fondant, and then just pressing that seam together, and then taking my fondant smoother and just really pressing this fondant on that drum, just making sure everything is nice and smooth. And then I want to take my X-Acto knife and just cut off the excess fondant. And now I'm using my ribbon cutter just to make the planks. I want them all to be the same size. So I'm starting in the very front of the cake and making sure that is going across. And then I'm aligning one wheel on that line that I just made, and then continuing to make the planks. And I'm not pressing too hard with the ribbon cutter. I'm just trying to put the lines in the fondant, and then I will go back and deepen them with my tools. Now I'm taking my Dresden tool and I'm just deepening these lines. Now the Dresden tool comes to a curve at the bottom, and I'm just using the curve to deepen these lines. I don't want to use the point because I don't want to poke a hole in the fondant. And once that's done, I'm just going over these just to really make sure that these lines are defined. And now I'm just making the wood marks in the fondant. So I just like to do little short lines, having a little bit of space in between, and just going down all of the planks and doing this. So this is just a really simple way to get a wooden look to your fondant. And this part's optional, but if you want to add some knots into the wood, I'm just taking my Dresden tool and pushing down in random areas to get the look of wooden knots. And then I'm taking my X-Acto knife and just trimming any excess fondant from adding all of that detail. Some of the fondant did end up going over the edge of the board again, and I'm just taking my fingers and smoothing all of that out. Now I want to airbrush this. If you need to protect your cake from the airbrush, you could take some plastic wrap and wrap it around the cake. I am going to be decorating that cake with some more fondant, so I'm not going to do that. I have some brown airbrush coloring that I'm putting in my airbrush gun. I'm just testing it on a paper towel, and I'm just deepening these lines. Now, I don't want to use too much airbrush coloring, just enough to bring out the lines in this fondant. If you use too much, it's going to bleed. It's not going to look right. So when you airbrush, it just looks best if you do a couple thin coats. And I'm also spraying some of that airbrush coloring in those little wooden knots. And now I'm just spraying the fondant. I want some of the light fondant to show through, so I'm just lightly spraying it all along the board. And then I want to get a little bit of that airbrush coloring around the border, so I'm just spraying it around the outer edge of the fondant. And I want to let that dry for about 20 minutes before I start adding the next coat. So now I have some brown airbrush coloring and a little bit of black to deepen it up. I have it in this cup, and then I'm going to pour that in my airbrush gun. And I want to deepen the color in the lines of the plank. So I'm holding my gun pretty close to that fondant just so I get a more precise spray. And I'm just going along all of the lines of the planks. And again, I'm lightly spraying the board just to give it a little bit more dimension, but still making sure you could see the light and the medium brown shine through. And then I just want to deepen the detail around the outer brim of the drum as well. And then I'm taking a damp paper towel and just removing any excess airbrush coloring that's on the side before I take some non-toxic glue and get that around the outside and on the back of this ribbon and wrap that around here for a nice finishing touch. And then where it gets to the very back, I'm just getting a little bit more glue down and then pressing that ribbon down and just pressing it down with my finger one more time, making sure that this ribbon is completely adhered to the cake drum. And here is the wooden fondant cake board. How cool is that? Now, I don't have this cake completed yet, but I have done it on a cake like this, and it is just a really simple way to add a really nice polished look to your cakes.